Hey everyone, I recently entered and won first place in the Collab Jam #1 on itch.io. If you don't know what a game jam is, it's an organized event where participants have to make a game from scratch in a given time frame. In this jam's case, we had 48 hours. It was an awesome jam with 21 participants, many of them also content creators. Usually with game jams, it'll take me an hour or so to brainstorm a good idea, but this jam started at 11 PM the previous day, and I had been able to sleep on it and come up with an idea overnight. Recently, I watched Vertical Limit for the first time and loved it. The plot of the movie seemed to fit nicely with the theme too, which was the unexpected. In Vertical Limit, the climbers are met with an unexpected blizzard and try to power through it to the summit. So I knew I wanted to make a climbing game, but what would the gameplay be like? I thought back to some of my favorite movement-based games. Mount Your Friends, a game where you grab onto objects using buttons that control your limbs and swing with a thumbstick. And Pogo Stuck, my favorite game of the year by far, where you have to bounce your way up to the top of the mountain, trying not to fall down. With the basic game mechanics finalized in my head, I started work on the game. Since the jam allowed art assets not made in the time frame, I made sure to take advantage of this and search for a model that would work for the player on the asset store. After some slight issues, it was looking good enough, and I started working on converting it into a ragdoll with the help of a Brachy's tutorial. Once the ragdoll was finished, I implemented a camera controller and the UI for the limbs. I wanted the key that controlled each limb to display on top of it to prevent confusion. Next, I made it so that when the limbs were close enough to grab something, a yellow outline would appear to help players know when they could grab. To get the grabbing mechanic working, I looked into different methods of getting objects to stick to walls before I settled on just creating and destroying a fixed joint component. Then I started trying to get the forces to add to the limbs in the direction of the mouse. This was by far the most infuriating part of the jam for me and sucked up a ton of time. It never seemed to want to work, even when the code seemed fine. That seems to be the most common trend in programming for me. I decided to take a break and make some music. Here's the horrendous melody I concocted. All I can say is how glad I am I never included that in the final game. Not feeling so great about the song I just made, I got back to working on the mouse movement. After a long time spent looking at forum posts, I eventually got it working well enough. The main problem with my solution is that I was just trying random things in a wild attempt to get it to work. This means that not even I know how it works, and sometimes it doesn't work at all, and since I'm not really sure how it works myself, I am unable to fix it. Now that the core game mechanics were pretty much finished, I decided to start working on the art. I picked up an HD stone texture from devassets.com and added it to the blocks in my scene. Then I started making some simple rock models in Blender. I spent a while experimenting with different combinations of the two rocks I made, tweaking their scale, rotation, and position to get new shapes. But I found that climbing towering structures was a lot less fun than just trying to climb a flat wall. This realization went on to lead most of the future level design. Since the game was so heavily inspired by Vertical Limit, hence the name Upward Restriction, I decided to embrace it and made a DVD case which you could open and insert the DVD into a DVD player. This would act as the first thing the player did when they opened the game. My thought process was that if the player saw how much time I had put into just the starting menu, they would assume the game was super polished and stick around to play more levels. Saying this out loud now sounds pretty devious, but since the gameplay was polished too, I thought I could get away with it. I always like to put a lot of polish into my menus, sometimes more than the actual game. I think it's the most neglected part of games during a game jam, and having a nice menu can help your game stand out. I modeled the DVD player, added some textures to the table and background, set up some post-processing, made some animations, wrote some code, and the starting menu was finished. With the starting menu done, I started work on the actual main menu. I took a VHS shader from some guy on Reddit and layered it on top of some background art. I wanted to model my menu after the DVD menu in Vertical Limit, and ended up achieving a respectably similar result. I wrote out a list of sounds I wanted to record and use in the final game. Then I went outside and recorded the sounds with the help of my dad and sister. Unfortunately, after recording the sounds, I found out that sound effects from external sources were allowed. With only a few of my sounds being good enough to actually use in the game, I opted to use some sounds from a sound pack I bought instead. I want to take a second to appreciate how big an impact post-processing has on the look of a game. I mean, just look at this. It goes from prototype I made in an hour to indie Steam game with just a few minutes of work. Anyway, pretty soon I realized that just having the player fall from a random spot in the air didn't make much sense and wasn't that fun. So I modeled a circus cannon in Blender and decided that the player would launch out of that. I also needed some sort of goal so that the player could beat the level, so I modeled and added one of those into the game too. Once I had finished the timer, level completion, and death, it was time to start working on more levels. I quickly made the level select scene, which I dubbed Scene Select to fit the DVD theme. But before I could start making more levels, my brain decided to add in online leaderboard functionality. Thankfully, I had already done it before, so it only took me a couple of hours. I'm actually really glad I added it in. In the final game, it was really fun to compete with other people to get the shortest time. At this point though, it was after midnight, and I was really tired from working on the game all day, so I decided to go to sleep. When I do a game jam, I dedicate every waking minute to finishing the game. I go full crunch mode for an entire weekend. Sometimes I'm so focused I don't eat until late in the evening. Today I spent 13 hours working on the game. I don't recommend that anyone do this, but game jams are the most fun for me when I squeeze everything I possibly can into the time frame. In any case, I've got a lot to do tomorrow, so I better go to sleep. I woke up the next morning and immediately got to work on the game. I finished up the online leaderboards, picked out some music, and started work on the story. So far, my game didn't have any similarity to the jam theme, The Unexpected. Originally, my connection to the theme had been the unexpected blizzard and vertical limit, but I didn't convey this anywhere in the game. I needed some way to tell the story to the player. Level-based storytelling didn't really work since I wasn't doing linear levels, and I didn't want to shove the story in players' faces every time they retried a level to try and get a higher score. I decided to do the storytelling through an opening movie, which also fits snugly with the DVD theme. It was basic, but it did its job of connecting the theme to the game. Here's part of it. By this point, I only had 2 levels completed, and about 9 hours left to finish the rest of them and add additional polish. It felt like more than enough time. But I couldn't get the player's limbs to move like I wanted them to. They would always lock up or get stuck behind the player's head, and it wasn't feeling fun enough to move around. I've never used a ragdoll in Unity before and had no idea how to fix it, so I started randomly tweaking values trying to get a good combination by chance. This ended up setting me farther back than I was before, and I decided to just reset it back to how it was previously. I hadn't made any backups, but thankfully I recorded everything and was able to copy the values directly from the recording. While the panic subsided, I finished up the 3rd level and started work on the game page. I had to get around to it eventually, and the game was stressing me out at the moment. I quickly added a 4th level, built and uploaded the game, and sent it to some friends for playtesting.
I can't help but get stuck here every single time. And I was like, what? Yeah, this last level is super hard, bordering on like unplayable. This isn't fun though. That's the problem. Like this is just painful to do. I mean, but until the last level, I really liked the starting like intro. Also, like 4.62 and 8.4. How the hell do you even do that?
Skill.
Yeah, you asked me if there's anything janky, and I'm like, I don't know, the control system. Okay, which appendage? Okay, I want to hit A, but then I gotta look to my keyboard and find out where A is, because I don't remember where A is.
You use WASD to play video games, haven't you?
No, like forward, backward, left, right. Like I'd rather have like the arrow keys instead of like the letters, because I know where theirs are. I don't have to look. I know W's at the top, and that's about as far as my knowledge goes.
From this playtest, what I really should have taken away was that the controls needed to be different. They were unintuitive and hard to learn. But instead, all I took away was that the final level was too hard. Oftentimes, when working on games, I'll make the game exactly how I want it, making the difficulty exactly what I want, with the controls that are most intuitive for me. But when making a game, you aren't designing for yourself, you're designing for your audience, and I made a big mistake not taking the feedback into consideration. Blind to what was truly wrong with the game, and with only 7 hours left, I started cramming out more levels. I made a level where you had to swing across open gaps, and one where you had to climb downward to reach the goal. After making a few more levels, I still wasn't satisfied with the amount I had. They could all be finished fairly quickly, and there were only 8 of them. The first few also felt really similar and boring. I realized that I had pretty much exhausted the basic climbing mechanic and needed something else. After a bit of brainstorming, I came up with an idea that seemed like it had a lot of creative uses for level design. I was going to make a new type of wall called ice, which was not grabbable and was extremely slippery. It's usually a terrible idea to add a game-changing mechanic so close to the end of the jam, but I was confident that it would be fun. And it was fun. I made a level where you slid across an ice sheet into a wall, and one where you had to navigate a maze bordered by blocks of ice. I even had time to make a secret level where you slid down tubes of ice, which ended up being broken in the final game. In the end, I was able to create 11 fun levels, and one secret level which no one will ever find. I built the final game and submitted it on the jam page, with 2.5 hours left until the deadline. So the jam's over. What now? After the jam there was a rating period where everyone played each other's games and gave feedback. It was really great to get feedback on the game, and a lot of it confirmed what I was worried about. The controls were difficult to use, and the vertical limit theme was a little too obscure for anyone to get. My biggest regret is not making the next level automatically load when you finish the one before it. It would have taken 5 minutes to implement, and I think it would have pushed people to play all the levels in the game. Plus, just because the difficulty was easy for me, didn't mean it would be that easy for everyone else. Since I implemented online leaderboards, I can see that most people never even made it past level 5. I could have definitely done a better job at easing the difficulty up and encouraging players to play farther. But despite its flaws, I love this game, and I'm really proud that I could create it in 48 hours.
You made a climbing game? Oh, this is gonna drive me insane. Upside down climbing for the win.